Number 10. Peter Parker of Earth 92100. You'd think the addition of extra arms for a Spider-Man would be an added benefit. When it happened to Peter in the 616 universe, he panicked and got rid of it with the DNA of Morbius. Understandably. But on Earth 92100, Morbius did not live long enough to help Peter, being eaten by sharks of all things. And since no one else could, Peter kinda had to just deal with it. Turns out, during a fight with Doc Ock, after Peter embraced his extra appendages, they actually give him a distinct advantage. They actually grant him much more strength and agility, and using them, he is even able to save Gwen Stacy from her demise. Unfortunately, they don't really protect him from the inheritors. Spider Limbs here sacrifices himself to save Spider-Man 2099 and Lady Spider in Spider-Man 2099 Volume 2 Number 6 in 2014. Number 9. Spider Assassin. Do you know how effective Spider-Man would actually be if he was a little less moral but still a crime fighter? Pretty effective. And while we've seen a few different examples of this, I chose to pull from What If? Spider-Man vs. Wolverine number 1, where we are introduced to Spider Assassin. In his universe, with great power comes great responsibility and greater enemies, which led this Peter of Earth 8351 to leave New York to protect his family. He joined up with Wolverine, and likely because of this friendship, he is much less opposed to sending criminals to the afterlife. He's also almost always serious, not resorting to quips and jokes to cope with situations anymore, which is reflected in his costume, which is a much darker look, especially with those black eyes. I really dig it. His web shooters have also been shown to shoot black webs in some panels, and they also include firearms. He is an effective addition to the Spider Army when it was formed, and an extremely effective Spider-Man indeed. Number 8. Spider's Man. Alright, yeah. Nope, not a fan of this one. You ever seen those videos of people finding spider nests where it's literally a swarm of spiders? Yeah, okay, imagine that, but they're super powered and come together to take on a human form. Now you've got the terrifying Spider's Man, which, side note, that's a great name. In Spider-Geddon number 3 of 2018, we are introduced to a colony of radioactively powered spiders who consumed a high school boy by the name of Peter Parker when he fell into their enclosure at Horizon Labs. After consuming Peter, the spiders gained a sort of hive mind in Peter's image and began fighting crime in Cruel York of Earth 11580. Other than his usual Spider-Man powers and the benefits of being a swarm of spiders, the colony is also able to poison its victims with a bite, or, if they're hungry for power, devour them whole. And it's incredibly hard to actually de-life this guy, as even a single spider being alive means technically Spider's Man is also still alive and can multiply to rebuild itself. Number 7. Spider UK. The first Spider-Man mashed with another Marvel hero. These mashups always make for powerful characters. Basically, Spider UK is William Braddock, hailing from Earth 833. If you haven't gathered from the Braddock namesake, Spider UK is what would happen if Spider-Man was Captain Britain. As such, he is part of the Captain Britain Corps, being introduced in the Edge of Spider-Verse Volume 1. He is also part of the Spider Army put together to take on the Inheritors, and a pretty important part of it, he was not only an amazing leader but also had a very useful dimension hopping ability. Unfortunately, this Spider-Man didn't actually have a spider sense, which is probably what allowed him to be de-lifed by an attack from behind in Spider-Geddon number 1. Number 6. Spider-Man 2099. Probably one of the most loved characters on this list. The Spider-Man of Earth 928, Miguel O'Hara, or as he's better known, Spider-Man of the dystopian future of 2099. This version of Spider-Man has many similar abilities to 616 Peter Parker, but some that are not so similar. He has super speed, which is actually capable of somehow creating a decoy. His spider sense allows him to telepathically communicate with others. He has accelerated vision, he has retractable talons, and also has fangs that he can use to paralyze others. And he has the famously disgusting organic spider silk spinnerets on his wrists. He first appeared as a preview in Amazing Spider-Man number 365 in June of 1992, and in his own series in Spider-Man 2099 number 1 in September 1992, and he is a titanically awesome character. Number 5. The Spider of Earth 15. There are a lot of characters who go by the Spider. But specifically, I'm talking about the one that's bonded with the Carnage symbiote who comes from Earth 15. The Spider of Earth 15 is a much more sadistic, sociopathic, red-headed version of Peter Parker, which is proven by the fact that he has been sentenced to a total of 67 life sentences in prison for the crimes he has committed. To make him just a bit more lovable, he has a sense of humor very much like that of Deadpool. The Spider was introduced in Exiles number 12 and was a big part of the reality-conquering Weapons X team featured in it, being a sometimes leader of that team. As a Carnage-bonded sociopath, he was pretty powerful, but he was nonetheless sent to the afterlife by a blast from Firestar in Exiles number 44. Number 4. Poison. From one symbiote to another. Every time that pesky Venom symbiote would try to merge with Peter Parker, he would only get halfway before Peter could repel him. Now, what happens if Peter Parker is defeated by Venom, who completely bonds with him? In the What If Spider-Man the Other story, after Peter is defeated by Morlun and cocoons himself under Brooklyn Bridge, he is offered the chance to be resurrected by the Spider God. But instead of allowing this, he refuses and is ejected from his cocoon non-resurrected. Cut to Venom, who, being Spider-Man's crazy ex-girlfriend, senses what is happening and completely ditches his current host. He intercepts Peter's body and after months of struggling, fully bonds to Peter. Now, Peter has all the fully realized powers that come with being a symbiote, but he actually has stingers that are capable of piercing the skin of Luke Cage, which is pretty insane. Number 3. Spider-Hulk. The second Spider amalgam here. Spider-Man of the Immortal Hulk with Great Power story is granted the alter ego of the Hulk after Loki magically transferred the Gamma power to him. So it's Spider-Man's relative spider powers mixed with an unstoppable green monstrosity with the temperament of a toddler. It's actually really cool. Eventually, the power of the Hulk is switched back to Banner with the help of the Fantastic Four and Banner's own genius. It's a short little story that seems almost self-contained, but it's an insanely cool one, and a Spider-Hulk would be an incredibly powerful character if he were to show up again and had more time to hone his abilities and temper tantrums. Number 2. Ghost Spider. The last Spider-Man mashup with other heroes, but nonetheless possibly one of the most powerful potential mashups. Also, in my opinion, the coolest looking one. Also, it appears that Uncle Ben leaving this plane of existence is actually a really good thing. See, on Earth 11638, Ben never loses his life to a mugger, and he helps train Peter with his powers and helping him form Parker Industries. Peter and Uncle Ben end up building a machine that allows Peter to lure alternate versions of Spider-Man to this reality where he absorbs their powers to increase his own. That kinda took a dark turn, didn't it? But when he tried to do this to the apparently most powerful Spider-Man from Earth 616, he is de-lifed and his soul is sent to hell, where, with the assistance of the Infernal Hulk, he is fused with the spirit of vengeance, becoming the Ghost Spider. If you know anything about Ghost Rider, you know how actually insanely powerful he is, even going toe-to-toe with Galactus at one point. So yeah, this Spider-Man / Ghost Rider guy is potentially extremely powerful. Number 1. Cosmic Spider-Man. There was a point in time when Peter Parker of Earth 616 absorbed the Enigma Force and became the most powerful version of Spider-Man we have ever seen, even capable of punching the Hulk into orbit. In the mainline continuity, he doesn't have it for very long, but on Earth 13, he kept the powers and became the hero Captain Universe. So, this Peter Parker has all the usual Spider-Man powers, but also now has cosmic awareness where he can sense things on a subatomic level and from crazy distances. He has energy manipulation, giving him energy blast and flight. He also used his abilities to manipulate matter, making his webs as strong as adamantium, or even changing their shape altogether. His universe became a safe haven for all the Spider-Men when the Inheritors were hunting them, because Captain Universe could defeat them, and his cosmic powers are gone when he leaves that dimension. Unfortunately, he is consumed by Solus, who used the life force basis of his powers against him in Amazing Spider-Man number 11 in 2014. He's still cool though. Number 10. Twinkie Spider-Man. Woody Harrelson's character from Zombieland would be ecstatic. While originally a crossover advertisement deal between Hostess, you know, the company that owns Twinkies, Snowballs, and those cupcake snack pastries, and Marvel, the Spider-Man of Earth 51914 is an official member of the Spider-Verse, being defeated by Morlun in the first Spider-Verse comic in 2014. This sweet Spider-Man has all the same powers as our 616 spider-based hero, only he has the added benefit of using hostess snacks as equipment to distract, lure, and reason with criminals, and even get out of tight spots in his relationships, like when he gave Mary Jane a cupcake so he could slip away to fight crime. Yeah, using his pastry-based equipment, he was able to defeat the Fly, Printout Man, Simon the Evil Swami, Madame Web, Legal Eagle, an unnamed jewel thief, chairman, homewrecker, demolition derby, photo man, hotshot, Junjitsu, Larsenius Lil, and the human computer. So yeah, that's not just a sponsor, it's an added ability that puts him a cut above any regular old Spider-Man. Number 9. Spider-Man Noir. When darkness falls on New York City, only one hero in a black fedora and a trench coat can use his keen detective skills and the powers bestowed upon him from a spider god to solve crimes and protect the citizens. It's Spider-Man, see? A grittier, more serious and ruthless world calls for a Peter Parker who is much the same, and the Spider-Man Noir is definitely that guy. After he seeks out revenge on the Goblin for taking away the life of his Uncle Ben, he goes to a warehouse where a spider idol containing thousands of spiders is broken. One of these spiders bites Peter, and zim zim zalabim, Peter has visions of a spider god and is granted abilities. Spider-Man Noir may not be the most powerful character in the Spider-Verse, but he has the power of popularity on his side, being a fan favorite character ever since his introduction, which is why, in my opinion, he is one of the only Spider-Men to survive Morlun, despite whatever excuses the comics gave. Number 8. Peyton Parnell. I think this is the most terrifying version of Spider-Man I have ever seen. Maybe even more so than Spiders-Man. Peyton Parnell, or Patton Parnell, is nothing like Peter Parker. He's a sociopath, a maniac, and he has the ability to transform into a monster spider-slash-man hybrid with 8 eyes, 8 limbs, and massive spider-like fangs. Seeing this bald monster thing crawl around your walls and your ceiling, that's scary enough, but knowing he ate at least 3 people, including his uncle, and can implant hundreds and hundreds of baby spiders into you just by biting you, is absolutely nightmare-inducing. Luckily, he gets defeated pretty soon after his creation by Morlun, but at the time Patton Parnell from Earth 51412 was around, he was very powerful and very scary. Number 7. Spider-Ham. Hailing from a verse where all the Marvel characters are replaced with cartoon character animal versions of themselves, Peter Porker is Spider-Ham, a pig. Peter Porker was actually born a spider named Peter, and he lived in the basement lab of May Porker, a scientist who had created the world's first atomic-powered hairdryer. May Porker, using the atomic hairdryer, accidentally irradiated herself, and then bit Peter the Spider, which made him turn into an anthropomorphic pig, just like her, only with the relative powers of a spider. In his premiere issue, he would go on to do battle with Hulk Bunny, created when Bruce Bunny was trapped in an arcade cabinet and bombarded with gamma radiation. Look, I wish I was making all this up, I really do. Spider-Ham has most of the same abilities as 616 Spider-Man, only he has this rather unique ability called Spider Nonsense, which basically allows him to be more and more cartoony the more danger he is in, which is the perfect reason to have the wackiest nonsense happen that will save this piggy hide in some of the most imaginative ways possible. This power alone helps him to be an extremely powerful Spider-Man, or pig. Number 6. Takayua Yamashiro. Instead of being Peter Parker, the Japanese Spider-Man, Spiderman, is Takuya Yamashiro, a motocross racer and son of astrophysicist Dr. Hiroshi Yamashiro. Unlike most versions of Spider-Man, Takayua was introduced through a live-action Japanese Spider-Man TV show. With that, his character differs quite a bit. For starters, his spider powers are a little less powerful due to budget constraints for the show, which is a hilarious reason. But to make up for that, he utilizes a whole mech named Leopardon, Power Ranger style, with arm rockets, a giant sword, and a boomerang. Classic. He uses Leopardon and his spider abilities to fight the Iron Cross Army. It's a group of suspiciously human-looking aliens from an unnamed world who are led by, wait for it, Professor Monster. Due to his popularity and just how awesome he is, Takayua Yamashiro has become an official character in the multiverse, coming from Earth 51778, fighting against the Inheritors alongside the Spider Army, and he is set to appear in the second animated Spider-Verse movie, which I am pumped to see. Number 5. Superior Spider-Man. This variation of the Spider-Man is unique for this list. It is Peter Parker from Earth 616, only his body is actually inhabited by the mind of Otto Octavius, Dr. Octopus. But he isn't evil. No, being in the body of Peter gave Otto an insight into Peter's life and motivation, and actually gave him a change of heart. Now we have a Spider-Man with all the powers of Peter Parker, but the super genius intellect of Otto, who vowed to dedicate himself to being the best Spider-Man he could in honor of Peter, who had seemingly been de-lifed while inhabiting Otto's body. And boy, he did that vow justice. The combo of that body with this mind helped him to be one of the strongest versions of Spider-Man ever, with a new enhanced suit and a ruthless way of dealing with criminals. He would eventually sacrifice himself to allow Peter to come back to inhabit his body once again. But man, was this a powerful main universe variant. Number 4, Miles Morales. He is possibly one of the most popular variants of Spider-Man to come into the Marvel multiverse. And for good reason. Miles Morales is an incredible character. He has almost all the regular spider abilities plus some amazing powers unique to himself, namely his venom, which is like a form of bioelectricity that he can emit from his body and use in some really cool ways, like in punches, beams, and blasts, as well as at long range using his webbing. But it doesn't stop there. He is also able to use a spider camouflage to make his whole body and even his clothes and costume go invisible. And he is apparently immortal, as a side effect of the Oz formula that gave him his abilities. Miles hails from the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, which fits, because he is an ultimate version of Spider-Man. Number 3, Zombie Spider-Man. I know a lot of people are tired of hearing about Marvel zombies. Well, too bad! He's a powerful version of Spider-Man, so you know what? Just kind of deal with it, okay? Cool, alright. Yes, Zombie Spider-Man is essentially the same Spider-Man everyone is used to. All the same powers at least. Except after being bit by a zombie, he now also has a ravenous hunger that cannot be sated no matter what, which led him and a group of other heroes to consume the Silver Surfer and Galactus, which gave them all the power cosmic. With this power cosmic, the zombie Galacti have the ability to absorb and tap into ambient cosmic energy into their bodies at will and expel those energies, like channeling beams of energy through their hands with destructive force and teleporting through time and space, devouring entire planets. With this power, they have the potential to phase through objects, accelerate the evolution of life forms, see the past by peeling back the layers of time travel, and manipulate, absorb, and discharge any form of energy or radiation. Though Spider Zombie loses all of his power, he still had it, and was an incredibly powerful version of Spider-Man. Number 2, Penny Parker. This Parker from Earth 14512 doesn't actually have any powers of her own. So how is she at the number 2 spot? Because of the totally awesome mech SP//DR suit worn by her father before his demise, and that is half controlled by a radioactive spider. First appearing in Edge of Spider-Verse number 5 in October of 2014, Penny and the spider mech are essentially able to do anything, as she doesn't actually have any written limitations yet. Yes, that's a lame reason for her to be so powerful, but it is a legit reason all the same. The mech suit is outfitted with weapons for basically any situation a story calls for, and defenses that would put pretty much any other Spider-Man to shame. Why is she not higher up? Well, because all this could very easily change, and also because there is one variant of Spider-Man who is an ultimate universal threat. Number 1, Bully Maguire. The dance moves, the hair, the suit, able to flirt with anyone, demands promotions with a flick of his hair, unaffected by social norms, finger guns that could bring down an entire neighborhood, and a swagger that has everyone and their moms turning their heads. He is Bully Maguire. First appearing in Spider-Man 3 in 2007, this variation of Spider-Man has underneath his devilish suits a black venom-bonded spider suit that enhances his abilities and personality and gives him the awesome ability to throw some dirt in your eye that will make you lose your job. But if you want forgiveness, get religion. Bully Maguire has the unique ability to take to the internet, invading many different realities, including our own. Because of this, he has gone up against and shamed too many opponents to count. Thanos, Steve Harvey from Family Feud, President Joe Biden, Will Smith, characters in Star Wars, SpongeBob SquarePants, and the list goes on and on and on and continues to grow. There is truly no one safe from Bully Maguire, even me.
Number 10. Man-Spider. Man-Spider is a version of Peter who ended up mutating and having multiple arms from the main continuity. It was a pretty freaky time in Peter's life and happened after Spider-Man tried to create a cure to get rid of his abilities and return him to his normal old depowered self. Unfortunately for Peter, this definitely did not work as planned and instead just left him with 4 arms instead of 2. Basically the opposite of the desired effect, leaving him more freaky than normal, which was kind of what he was going for. There is a version of the 4-armed Spider-Man who actually ended up keeping the arms instead of getting rid of them, and he hails from the reality of Earth 1298 and is known as Man-Spider, obviously. I'm guessing that having a secret identity would be pretty tricky for someone like Man-Spider. Number 9. Savage Spider-Man. Savage Spider-Man had an upbringing among monsters, and for that reason can be considered kinda monstrous. His appearance isn't super monstrous, although he does share his editorial name with a series that seems to feature a pretty frightening looking mainstream Savage Spider-Man, which we may or may not talk about later. Savage Spider-Man of Earth 83043 ended up getting his powers from growing up in the Savage Lands. His story is that he was lost there after the plane he was on with his parents crashed. His parents died in the crash, but young Peter survived and was taken in by the giant spiders of Savage Land, whose toxic bites helped him to build up both an immunity to toxins and also granted him spider-like superpowers. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you haven't already, please head on over to Facebook where you can follow us there as well. It really does help us out here and it helps us out there, so yeah, just help us out. And also thanks for doing that if you've already done that. You're like, I get it, Amanda, you say it every time. Just want to make sure you know. Number 8. Scarlet Spider. Kane was one of the clones of Peter Parker that we got to know in the Clone Saga. He typically goes by the mantle of Scarlet Spider now, which at one point was actually used by another Peter clone, Ben Reilly. Initially in the comics, Kane was presented more as a villain, or at least a misunderstood villain. He misunderstood hero. He wasn't really completely a straight up villain, but he did some shady things. He was a clone that was basically defective, and as a result his degeneration messed with his mind. He also came with the Mark of Cain, which was pretty monstrous, which allowed him to seemingly burn the skin of those he touched, typically leaving his Mark of Cain on their face. In reality, this was just a variation of Spider-Man's wall crawl power, as when Spider-Man crawls on walls, this is because of little hook hairs basically in his hands and feet, which allow him to stick. See the Sam Raimi movies for that in person. Similar deal for Kane, but he was using this to basically melt people's faces at the time. Number 7. Ghost Spider. Not to be confused with the other Ghost Spider, Gwen Stacy of Earth 65, this Ghost Spider is an alternate version of Peter Parker from Earth 11638. In this reality, Uncle Ben did not die and was there to help mentor Peter Parker as he continued on his journey as a hero. Peter here became not just a celebrity and an icon as a superhero, but was also a successful business owner and a philanthropist. However, in secret, he and Ben were working together to lure other Spider-Men from other realities to their world so that they could zap them of their power, killing them in the process in order to bolster Earth 11638 Spider-Man, transferring their powers to him and making him stronger. In the end, Spider-Man of Earth 616, who fell into this trap, helped Earth 11638 Peter Parker to see the error of his ways. Having a change of heart, this version of Spider-Man sacrificed himself to save 616 Peter, ending up in a coma as a result. He was returned to life by an alternate Sorcerer Supreme who needed his help, and then came back as the Ghost Spider, who kinda looks like a blue flame Ghost Rider. Number 6. Mainstream Savage Spider-Man. Mainstream Savage Spider-Man comes from his own self-titled series, which spins out of Non-Stop Spider-Man. So if you wanted to read Savage Spider-Man, I'd recommend going back and reading that first. I think it's only like 5 issues, so it's also not too long. This story, I believe, is part of the mainstream continuity, so technically the Peter Parker that we see here in his monstrous form is in fact Earth 616 Peter Parker. In the Non-Stop Spider-Man series, there was even mention of the Beyond Corporation, which also helped me to really cement this, at least in my mind, as part of the main continuity canon. I mean, I saw it was kind of listed as that, but I was skeptical, and then I saw that and I was like, nah, no, it's probably main continuity. I think we can definitely say it's main continuity. So hopefully I am right and not wrong about that. But while this is technically 616, it's also a very specific look and time in Peter's life, like back when he had those 4 arms, which we kind of touched on earlier. So I figured I could count it for the purpose of this list. It's also where our thumbnail for this video will likely come from, so thought it might be cool to explain it if you're like, hey, what's that thing? That's Savage Spider-Man. Savage Spider-Man is Earth 616 Peter Parker mutated mediated by the drug known as A+, which typically improves performance at the cost of intelligence for most users. However, for Spider-Man, due to his unique physiology, it also turned him into a kinda like part man, part spider monster hybrid thing. Poor Peter. Number 5. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is definitely one of the creepiest ideas for an alternate Spider-Man that we've seen in maybe ever. This version of Peter Parker was actually consumed by spiders, but his consciousness was also absorbed by them. So while physically he's gone, mentally he kinda like lives on in them. He's literally a Spider-Man made of spiders. Hence the name Spiders-Man. He has a tragic backstory, but don't feel too bad for him. He also would be the one to team up with a Norman Osborn version of Spider-Man, plotting to betray the rest of the spider army that he had been recruited to. And he also, as a bunch of spiders, seems to enjoy kinda eating people, a taste he developed as time went on. Number 4. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell is one of the vilest alternates of Spider-Man around. He shows up during our exploration of the Spider-Verse, where we learn that he is a fairly sadistic alternate of Peter Parker, whose hobbies include things like burning ants with a magnifying glass on hot sunny days, and spying on his neighbor whom he's kinda obsessed with, Sarah Jane. Patton, of course, is likely twisted in part because it is heavily implied that his uncle mistreats him. He is bitten by a spider, but instead of gaining miraculous abilities that all in all make him a more responsible person and a hero, he becomes a spider-like creature, mutating and becoming more monstrous and murderous, both inside and out. Yikes. Number 3. Poison. Poison is an alternate version of Peter Parker inspired by the Spider-Man story The Other. He hails from a what if where we explore the idea of what would have happened had Spider-Man rejected his connection to the spider within and rejected instead of embracing his role as a spider totem. This would have left Peter vulnerable basically to outside attack. Trapped within his cocoon with no way out, the symbiotic being that we often refer to as Venom sensed Peter's vulnerability and saw a chance to merge with him. Venom then leaves his current host Matt Gargan to forcibly connect with Peter, and together they become Poison. Poison is horrifying and attempts to recruit Mary Jane as his partner, but after she rejects him, he believes that the corpse of Gwen Stacy will suit him better. Oh dear. Number 2. Matt Gargan. Matt Gargan is known as the Spider-Man villain Scorpion, but at one point he too became an alternate version of Spider-Man, albeit a really messed up and twisted version, as he served as Spider-Man for Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers, which was primarily made up of villains posing as heroic counterparts. In Mac's case, the heroic mantle he was made to fill in for was Spider-Man, although he wasn't so much Spider-Man but kinda like an alternate Venom posing as Spider-Man. His suit was made of the symbiotic being known as Venom, who was merged with him at the time, and was also like really juiced. But Norman fixed it so that he wouldn't appear as juiced. He still kinda got like a little giant. He got a little giant when it came to him attacking people though. This often turned Matt Gargan's Spider-Man into a horrifying monster who threatened to, and often actually did, devour those people who stood in his way, even sometimes almost eating his own teammate, which obviously they did not like. Number 1. I-APEC. I-APEC is known in Marvel Comics as I-APEC the Decapitator, and was once worshipped as a god in Peru. Remember how we talked about Man-Spider earlier? I-APEC is like a more terrifying version of that being. He is typically known as having pointed teeth, snakes for hair with multiple arms, and his lower half being the hairy body and legs of a spider. He ended up getting recruited to Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers to act as their Spider-Man after Matt Gargan was Spider-Man, because this was a different version of Spider-Man, a different version of the Dark Avengers, after Norman Osborn escaped the Wrath the second time, this time successfully, and then attempted to resurrect Hammer and bring back the Dark Avengers. I-APEC was made to look more humanoid, more like Spider-Man with a genetic formula, except for the fact that, you know, he had 4 arms still, so almost like Spider-Man, like, but not quite. Later on, he would also be coerced into serving on Luke Cage's Dark Avengers, which were kinda like DC's Suicide Squad at the time. Number 10. Kane Parker. Kane was one of the first evil clones ever made of Spider-Man, and really, he wasn't evil of his own choosing. He was kinda just a bad dude because he was so defective and was quickly degenerating. His degeneration made Kane somewhat insane, and his powers also didn't help. His own version of Spider-Sense was more precognitive, giving him visions of the future. The problem? With each vision he viewed, continued, he would become more and more unhinged. Kane Parker would start out as being more of a sinister figure, but as time went on, he'd really become more of a moody anti-hero in the comics. In some cases, he was also only originally an antagonist because his motives were misunderstood by Peter. Number 9. The Jackal. At one point, another clone who was previously considered to be one of the best clones with the most potential for good also turned to the dark side. Yes, this clone was none other than Ben Reilly. Having recalled all of his deaths from when Miles was experimenting on Ben in an attempt to perfect the cloning process, Ben became somewhat unhinged. He ended up defeating and killing Miles Warren only to bring him back as a clone and convince Miles to work for him. This would result in Ben adopting the mantle of the Jackal for himself and building a clone army of Spider-Man's previously dead friends, allies, and even villains, as well as building the New U Technologies Corporation. In exchange for the clones' cooperation, Ben provided them with pills that would help to stave off the degeneration while he worked to perfect the cloning process himself, and a frequency technology that would substitute the pill for, well, likely only a chosen few, because Ben probably wanted to control the other clones. He was like, I'm good, but also I'm kind of controlling you. Well, he meant well. When Peter was approached to join the Jackal, who was revealed to him to be Ben, he simply refused, believing that the Jackal was a perfect example of having all the power but none of the responsibility. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want another list like it where we talk about even more evil Spider-Men, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. There are surprisingly a lot of evil Spider-Men out there. Number 8. Ghost Spider. While redeemed in the end, initially when we met Peter Parker, who was to become Ghost Spider, we would learn of just how evil he was. Ghost Spider is the Peter Parker from Reality Earth 11618, where he was previously known as simply the Amazing Spider. Not to be confused with Ghost Spider, who is Gwen Stacy from an alternate reality. I think that's Earth 65. So now there's kind of two Ghost Spiders, but anyways. This version of Ghost Spider makes an appearance in the 2011 ASM Annual number 38. Here we learn what happens when Uncle Ben does not die, but instead gets to live out his life alongside his nephew. He ends up teaching Peter that with great power comes a great responsibility to keep said power. As a result, he ends up training Peter, who eventually not only becomes a successful hero, but also a successful businessman and a successful scientist. Uncle Ben and Peter decide to use their scientific knowledge to lure other Spider-Men from the multiverse to their reality, and then drain them of their power to be used to booster or bolster the Amazing Spider's own abilities and powers, making him even more powerful with each transfer. However, the Spider-Man of Earth 616, when caught in this trap, was able to convince the Amazing Spider that what he was doing was pretty wrong. In the end, he sacrificed his own powers and life to help the Spider-Man of 616 escape. However, he didn't actually die, but ended up in a coma, with his soul trapped in hell. Eventually, he would awaken and return as Ghost Spider. Redemption, baby. Number 7. Poison. Poison is the alternate version of Peter Parker who comes from the What If version of the other story. In this version of the story, Peter abandons the spider within himself. This leaves Peter detached and vulnerable. Sensing this, the Venom symbiote leaves its then host, Matt Gargan, in pursuit of Peter Parker, who is still within his cocoon. The symbiote forcibly bonds with Peter and emerges from the cocoon as a new entity that goes by the name of Poison. Instinctively returning to Mary Jane, it then attempts to convince her to join its side, but terrified of what both the symbiote and what Peter have become, she rejects them. Ultimately, they decide to dig up the body of Gwen Stacy and make her their new partner in crime. Yikes. Poison is all around just bad news. Very, very evil. Very spooky. Not that all spooky things need to be evil, just to be clear. Number 6. Zombie Peter. This alternate version of Peter Parker hails from Earth 2149, sometimes referred to as Earth Z or the Marvel Zombieverse. In this reality, Peter did his best to hold out and avoid becoming infected, but ultimately did succumb to that after being bitten by Steve Rogers, known as Colonel America in this reality. After being bitten, Spider-Man began to transform into a zombie. Before the change overtook him, he hoped to get Aunt May and Mary Jane somewhere safe, and returned home, only to be overcome by the infection. As a result, he ended up eating both of his loved ones, unable to resist the hunger he felt deep inside himself. Spider-Man in this reality goes on to become one of the zombie Galacti, taking on the power cosmic after eating Galactus. However, in the end, he's also one of the few surviving zombies who aims to prevent the spread of the zombie plague to other universes, eventually becoming a hero once once more. As so many evil Spider-Men do, they always come around in the end, even if they're a zombie. Number 5. Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage hails from the 90s animated Spider-Man series. Here, Spider Carnage hailed from an alternate reality where after being cloned and losing both his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben, he began to question whether or not he was the real Peter Parker or the clone himself. As this version of Peter was filled with rage, Carnage entered his world via a portal and bonded with this alternate version of Peter Parker, who then became Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage threatened the existence of the entire multiverse, and it took a team of heroic Spider-Men coming together to stop him. Eventually, he was convinced by his still living alternate version of Uncle Ben that what he was doing was wrong, but was unable to remove the Carnage symbiote from him at that point, so he ultimately sacrificed himself to save the world from the evil of Carnage, and kind of the evil of himself, because he was so filled with rage and hate. Number 4. Patient Zero. This version of Peter hails from the reality belonging to the series Marvel Universe vs. the Punisher, the reality of 11080, where Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, was the last known survivor who was forced to take on, you guessed it, the entire Marvel Universe, after the world was ravaged by a deadly and horrifying plague. Here, Peter ends up becoming Patient Zero after a virus, which is the plague, is accidentally released that turns people into violent cannibals. Peter himself devours Rhino during a hockey match and is taken to be researched by the Fantastic Four. However, he does not stay quarantined as the virus spreads to Ben Grimm of the FF, who then releases him. He goes on to become the leader of one of the cannibalistic tribes involved in a turf war. The Punisher ends up killing him after helping to rescue a pregnant Mary Jane in exchange for information that Patient Zero has. I don't think this version of Spider-Man is ever really fully redeemed. He does try to save Mary Jane though, so that's something. Number 3. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell has to be one of the most evil incarnations of Spider-Man around. He's evil to the core. He literally becomes a Spider-Man, turning into a spider-like human hybrid after he is bit by a radioactive spider. Patton was also kind of always a creepy kid, likely as a result of mistreatment that he suffered at the mercy of his Uncle Ted. He had a crush on his next door neighbor, Sarah Jane, and enjoyed disturbing scientific pursuits such as burning ants with a magnifying glass. What fun. When he transformed into Spider-Man, he became more confident in himself, but also acquired a taste for live animal and human flesh. He also was capable of laying eggs, as Uncle Ted would horrifyingly and personally find out after young Patton took revenge on him. That's all I'll say about that, but we might be showing you a scary panel of that right now. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the editor's doing in this video, but cue scary panel of Ted having spiders coming out of him. Ugh. Number 2. The Spider. This is a version of Peter Parker who also merged with the Carnage symbiote, and was possibly driven criminally insane by it. Or was criminally insane to begin with in this reality perhaps. This version of Peter hails from the reality of Earth 15. Not much is known about his home reality, mainly what we know of it involved Peter's own history. This alternate version of the character bonded with the alien symbiote that is often referred to as Carnage on Earth 616. He became an infamous mass murderer who apparently enjoys hurting people. He made his first appearance in the Exiles in issue number 12, where he showed up with a team of other heroes who were drafted into a multiversal version of Weapon X. I mean, they are heroes there, but they also kinda shady, you know? I mean, not all of them are, but definitely Spider is. Number 1. Wolf Spider. Wolf Spider comes from the animated show Ultimate Spider-Man. He was an alternate version of Peter Parker who hailed from the reality of Earth 16827 and was bad to the bone. Unlike many other alternate versions of Spider-Man, for some reason Wolf Spider became a villain instead of a hero when his spider-like powers manifested. He was a merciless killer, fighting to oppose anyone who fought on the side of good, was a hero, or believed in the ideal of responsibility. He even ended up killing his own reality's version of Miles Morales. And if that doesn't make you evil, I don't know what is, because Miles Morales is the best, and he's such a sweetheart. How dare you do that, Wolf Spider? I can't abide.